Hi, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Victoria Nicola. I'm an indie author and a Russian Soviet refugee. On this channel, I talk about books and history, communism, my family's experience in communism, the works. And today, however, I wanted to talk about something a little bit lighter, even though it's still on the dark side of history. Something lighter in general about Rasputin's assassination and why was Rasputin assassinated. And the reason I wanted to talk today about that is I just released a book about it, a dark comedy, alternative, technically it's alternative history. Um, Alternative historical about his unaliving, about the team of aristocrats and commoners that band together, a very misfit team, and attempted to unalive him several times before the night that became incredibly infamous, where he actually did meet his end. So the reason it's alternative historical is because I kind of, when I fell down the rabbit hole of researching for this book, um, I just thought, the entire story is so absurd. Really, it really is absurd. If you know anything about how he was actually killed the night of, it just seems like, they kept trying. It's like they kept pulling tricks out of a hat, and none of the tricks were working. And it's just so incredulous, really, that I kind of my gear started going, and I thought, what if this wasn't their first attempt? What if they attempted several times to unalive him and they couldn't, you know? And how funny in a dark sort of way would it be if they had like a really elaborate scheme, but ultimately it all like slowly deteriorated until the very fateful night that became famous, that Prince Yusupov, one of the conspirators, wrote about in a memoir. Anyways, so I thought it would be really funny in a dark sort of way. Okay, I have a dark sense of humor, I think, because of my entire history with everything. And so I kind of, when I say funny, I'm just, so I don't constantly repeat myself, like in a dark sort of way. You know what I'm saying? Okay, it's dark comedy. Okay, so I thought it would be entertaining, to say the least, if I kind of given the historical details that we know about the characters, if I wove together a plausible story of how they actually attempted to do this before that night where they finally managed to kill him. Anyways, it's a really long intro, but I wanted to share today the kind of the theories and the conspiracy theories that I came across while researching this book, and I thought you guys would appreciate it. Okay, so by the way, also, I know it's been like 2 weeks since I uploaded a video. Sorry, again, I mentioned before, I get really busy with life. I have a lot going on, so um sometimes hopefully I'm gonna try to upload once a week, but it might happen less frequently. And and also the other thing is I noticed that a lot of people that watched a couple videos ago, they were interested in some of those topics that I mentioned that I would discuss later. And when I released that video discussing the topic, a lot of the people that mentioned they were interested, I don't know if they watched it. I don't even know if they got it because I think YouTube suppressed that video. So please subscribe. This is a very long pitch to just have you subscribe to my channel and maybe click the notification bell so you actually get notified if I release videos, because I do talk about socialism and communism in real colors. I don't sugarcoat anything, and I think that often gets suppressed. So if you want to stay up to date with my videos, please subscribe. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the theories, okay? So, theory number one that I thought was really interesting about why Rasputin was killed is the Brits were involved. And actually, before I get into that, let's lay some groundwork. What is frequently told to us in history books is that the reason Rasputin was assassinated was because the nobles that did it were so patriotic and so embarrassed by Rasputin's influence over the Empress Alexandra that they wanted to get rid of him. They thought he was basically leading the empire to its demise. And I'm not saying that that's not true. Okay, I think that Philip, Prince Felix Yusupov, um, actually said that in his memoir when he kind of talked about that night. However, I don't think that's the full story. First of all, there were a lot of people involved, and it was a very contentious time in Russian history, and it's not unbelievable that they didn't like the politics of Tsar Nicholas, okay, given the fact that there was a revolution a few months after the assassination. However, I do think that aside from these like grand political motivations, I personally see that some of these people had personal motivations. And this is just me kind of like reading between the lines of the details that I kind of uncovered. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into. And that's what I kind of also mentioned in the story. Okay, so back to the Brits. The Brits were involved via an agent called Oswald Rayner. I'll put a picture of him here. He was a fascinating guy. He actually, I don't believe there was any information about, okay, not, okay, I'm crossing wires. I don't remember if I found the actual information that he knew Prince Felix, but they both went to Oxford, okay? So it's not unlikely that they didn't know each other. Um, so I think that, so, and again, the reason the theories kind of the conspiracy theories say that the Brits got involved and sent Agent Oswald to help with assassination or to actually ultimately unalive him, um, because they also didn't like how Russia was performing in World War One, and they blamed Rasputin for it because what was happening at this time was while Tsar Nicholas was busy with World War One, he kind of took a back step of governing the entire country. And Alexandra was taking on a lot of the roles, and Rasputin was like whispering advice in her ears, and she like was solely devoted to him, and so she took a lot of his advice and implemented it. And not only regarding the country, but because she actually had a huge influence on what Tsar Nicholas did. So she would influence Tsar Nicholas to actually implement some of the changes that Rasputin recommended. And I think to the point where she like moved generals around, like it was military advice. Okay. So it was very clear that Rasputin wasn't just like advising her on matters of like the social life and theater and where to like create performances. No, he was actually trying to implement um, changes militarily and all that. Um, so the Brits, I think well, not I think, but the theory is the Brits also did not like Rasputin influencing the Empress and the Emperor. Okay. And it behooved them to not have those bad influences because Russia and England and Britain were on the same side in World War One. So that's theory number one. And I'm gonna talk about these theories. I'm gonna try not to do any spoilers about my book if you want it, actually read it. I also dive into theories that in here slightly that I'm not gonna talk about. I'll mention that later. But okay. Um, theory number two that I thought was really fascinating. Theory number two is that one of the, if not all of the Tsarist daughters were involved. Um, the night of the assassination, there were rumors that people saw. I believe it was the Grand Duchess Tatiana in the Moika Palace where Rasputin was assassinated, and that's Felix's palace. If I am not correct, I'll put like an asterisk and the name of the daughter that was rumored to be seen. Now, this is incredibly, incredibly down the rabbit hole, okay? Like, it's not mentioned in any diaries. Historians do not like this theory. It has absolutely no basis in anything other than like rumors. But I like this theory. I think, personally, I think there's no smoke without a fire, right? What's that, saying? I think that it's entirely possible for one of the daughters, to have been involved in the assassination. At the very least, maybe not completely plotting. I don't know how useful one of the daughters would have been in actually plotting the assassination. You know, they would be probably even less useful than the misfit team that already existed, because they were just so sequestered in life. They were sequestered to the palace. They were really involved. They were nurses in the military hospital in Tsarskoye Selo. So they were like really kind of removed from reality, and they had a very unique life. So I don't think that they would be able to like brainstorm a really successful plot. However, I can imagine, given the rumors that were happening at the time of the fact that Rasputin was behaving improperly with both the Empress and the daughters. Um, and I think, given those rumors, it is not unlikely, if that was happening, that one of the daughters would want to be involved in seeing his downfall at the very least. So, her having potentially having been seen at the Moika Palace when this all went down could have just been like a satisfying, oh God, like satisfying end to a torturous experience with this man. Okay. Um, I personally, there's again, there's two parties. One party says that he really was a scoundrel, and um, he was really improper with a lot of women. And so that kind of, it's not a far reach to say that he was also improper with the daughters. And then there's the camp saying, no, he was misunderstood. He was an imposter, but he was more looking for power rather than like any, um, what's the word? I don't want to say the word because I think I'm going to get banned, but you know what I'm talking. Assault. I don't think he was looking for that. However, given the fact that the daughters were incredibly naive to the real world, and that Alexandra herself was incredibly um, brainwashed, is the word, really. Like, she really was devoted to Rasputin. And it's not so much that it was Rasputin itself. I think Empress Alexandra, like, I want to maybe do a whole video about her because she's a fascinating woman. Before Rasputin even existed, if people don't know, there were two other spiritual advisors or mystics, or mediums, if you will, that had incredible influence over her. She was she was primed to be brainwashed by this whole concept of like mediumship. And I think partly it's because she was in a predicament where she kept having daughters. First of all, she wasn't Russian by birth, right? She was Prussian. She marries into this Russian family. She has this crazy burden of producing a male heir, and she just keeps giving birth to like four daughters in a row. And so she wants a son. And at that time, this concept of like seances and the occult, it was huge. It was huge amongst the aristocracy. And so she fell prey to basically con men who would claim that they had spiritual powers and that sort of thing, and they can do like voodoo magic. They didn't call it voodoo, you know what I'm saying. They could do magic and like connect to the spiritual realm to help her actually give birth to a male heir. And then she finally gives birth to a boy, and meanwhile, and oh, lo and behold, he's been diagnosed with hemophilia, so he could easily, unfortunately, not live to adulthood. And so then her obsession became of healing her son. And once again, she turned to mystics. So she was just like very vulnerable, and she was in a vulnerable position, and she was very vulnerable to these ideas. Okay. And this is not me excusing her bad decisions, because her partly bad decisions led to an entire country's downfall. Okay. But this is kind of like the foundation that we are entering. So, given all of that, I don't think it's unlikely that Rasputin, who was incredibly shrewd, who came from very like poor roots, who clearly had to have been very clever to make his way up to being like an advisor to the Empress, okay? I can see him like doing some like really weird improper rituals that he would claim would somehow give him favors in the spiritual realm. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see that as outside the realm of possibility. So that's just my take. You'll have to read my book to see what I do with that take. But that's another theory. Okay. So, theory number three. And here's where I'm going to go. This is not historical, like in terms of I found this actually written somewhere. This is my take of reading between the lines, of putting together information that I came across. Okay. So, um, for many people might not know, Duke Dmitri was rumored to have been betrothed to Grand Duchess Olga, who's the first daughter of Nicholas the First. Sorry, the first Nicholas the Second. Um, so it wasn't an official engagement, but it was clearly, I think in like diaries, it was written about, in 1912. It was like a potential engagement. And, it obviously didn't like come together, or even if it happened, it fell apart. And a big reason for that is because Dmitri was a bit of a party animal. And obviously, the Tsar's family was very religious, very strict, very like official, and his image and his lifestyle didn't fit with what they were looking for. Now, um, I personally think this is a very juicy piece of information. At the time, by the way, when he was potentially engaged to Olga, Rasputin was already in Alexander's ear. All right. And my take on this is that potentially, this is my theory. This is not something I read in a history book. Okay. So please take this with a grain of salt. That's why this is alternative historical. Um, Potentially, there could have been a personal vendetta that Dmitri had with Rasputin, for having broken off the engagement between him and Grand Duchess Olga. Now, there are also, this could have also not been true because there are also rumors that Olga didn't like Dmitri and he viewed her more like a sister. Um, the thing is, that whole like, I don't like him, I view like that doesn't really matter in those circles of in that level of royalty. You know what I'm saying? Like matches were made with people actually hating each other and not just like, I don't like him. Um, Especially for someone like Dmitri. So another piece of information that I found, and this is not a conspiracy, but Dmitri's father was actually, who was a Romanov, was actually, and I think he was Tsar Nicholas's uncle, um, was ousted out of polite society for marrying a woman that was considered below him, right, in status. And so he actually fled, moved to another country. I forget which country in Europe, but he moved, maybe Austria. I'll put it in the notes. And that wherever they moved to, um, his wife was then she was given a noble title. Okay. And after years living in that country, um, Tsar Nicholas granted, like, allowed them to come back and to like become part of polite society again. So, um, and Dmitri's mother actually died giving birth to him. Okay. So Dmitri didn't have like a stable experience in the noble class and the noble world in Imperial Russia. Okay, he was a bit of an outcast from the get-go because of his father's decisions. Um, so I think that it is entirely possible for Dmitri to have wanted the union with Olga, whether he had romantic feelings for her or not. It behooved him to have a connection with her because it would really solidify him in their circles. Obviously, he'd be the Tsar's son-in-law. So, I think that personally, I can see how there was a personal vendetta in the case of Duke Dmitry, who's one of the main conspirators, him and Prince Felix, um, for having to like basically, it was like revenge. It was revenge for having broken his engagement with Grand Duchess Olga. Again, these are my thoughts. I think that that's a really interesting thought experiment. Um, and I personally like digging in historical events and seeing what could have been. Um, because personally, if you read the way that the murder went down, it just seemed like it was personal. Do you know what I'm saying? When there's a political assassination, it's usually like quick, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. These people invited him for dinner. They tried to lure him with like Prince Felix's wife, and Countess Marianne, who was a stepsister of Duke Dmitri, who I also have as a character in here, and whose motivations I also get into. This is one of the characters that I'm going to leave for the book for you to find out why Marianne got involved in the assassination. She's also a fascinating historical figure. Um, so I mean, the entire event, it just reads a touch too personal for like a political assassination. You know what I'm saying? Like, think about the way Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, shot in the street. How Abraham Lincoln shot in the theater. It's just so like, and like they shoot and they run, they shoot and they run. That's how these political assassinations happen, right? The whole like, let's wine and dine him and poison the wine and the cake, and oh, that didn't work. And by the way, they eventually had to like shoot him, and that didn't work, and they eventually drowned him in a river. That's like, I'm not spoiling anything. That's just this historical take, like not take, but the historical story that Prince Felix gives us. However, that being said, um, when Rasputin's body was uncovered, it was clear that there was blunt force trauma, which means they like beat him, which Prince Felix never admits to in his memoir. Okay. So that kind of anger towards somebody seems a little more personal than a political decision. Do you know what I'm saying? So my entire take when I was researching this is I was looking for nuggets of like what personally motivated these people. Were they really just motivated by politics? And I think it's a mixed bag. I think, there was a politician who was involved, Vladimir Poroshkevich, and he, I think, was and it motivated like politically. He was a politician, and he was incredibly right wing. Like he supported the Tsar. He was a die-hard fan of Imperial Russia. Makes sense. The political reason for him makes sense. But for these other people who are involved, I mean, these are aristocrats. They lived in like outside of Russia more than half the year, oftentimes. You know what I'm saying? Like they lived in France and they traveled to Paris and into England and they like spoke French and sometimes more than Russian. I just have this like very kind of like big question mark about like were they really just upset about the politics of it all? Hmm. I personally don't think so. So I think there were personal motivations in a lot of these cases. Prince Felix is an interesting one. So his motivation is, I think, he was a rebel. Okay, so some people might not also know he was kind of like this cross-dressing socialite. Okay, he loved to party. He dressed as a woman on many occasions. And his wife Irina helped him with that, by the way. Okay, he didn't. It wasn't like Honestly, personally, I think he was bored. Okay. The man was the richest man. He was richer than the Tsar, the richest man in Imperial Russia. Um, I think he was just a bored guy who had all this money and had everything at his fingertips and was looking for adventure. And also, I think he was also potentially looking for a way to validate himself because I think he was perceived as like this ridiculous figure in a way. Not ridiculous in the sense, because if you actually can see an interview of him, he's very like stoic and noble, okay? But I think he was perceived as this kind of like party animal because let's be for real, if he's dressing like a woman and attending parties, sounds kind of like a party animal. Um, um, so I personally think that that's kind of like his goal. I didn't find any juicy details as much as I wished I would. Like I didn't find anything crazy about his relationship status or something like this. So he's just an interesting person because given the details of his life, him being the richest man in Russia or like his family being the richest family in Russia, um, what a crazy experience that must be. Anyways, those are my theories of why Rasputin was actually assassinated. There are different ideas that I don't even get into. Like I said, if you want to see what else I like cooked up in my head, please give my book a read. It is available on Amazon now, both ebook and physical copy. Um, anyways, and I'm gonna try to I want to have another video that I want to talk about the Russian Revolution and why was that actually, how was that sponsored and why did it actually happen as well? Also, kind of in the same vein, not so alternative history, but kind of like the theories I came across of why the revolution actually happened beyond what the history books tell us. Hopefully that'll be my next video. All right, guys, please subscribe to my channel and also let me know if you've come across any like fascinating theories about Rasputin and why he was unalived. Let me know. I'm all ears because I don't know, it's just a fascinating story. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.